March 17, 1944. 0947 hours, 24 Basenderon feet over the Rhine Valley, Western Germany. Second Lieutenant Jack Thornton pulled his P-38 Lightning into a shallow dive, watching 3 Focke-Wulf 190s climbing toward him in perfect formation. His hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves. The German pilots had seen him, and they weren't breaking off. They were accelerating, confident. The FW-190 was the Luftwaffe's pride, faster in level flight than almost anything the Allies could field. And these pilots knew it. Thornton's twin Allison engines roared on either side of his cockpit nacelle, 600 horsepower each. But the joke among Luftwaffe pilots was already spreading through occupied Europe. Why does the American fighter have 2 engines? Because one isn't good enough. The Germans were laughing. In 8 weeks they wouldn't be. Before we continue with Jack Thornton's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to March 17, 1944, over the Rhine Valley, where Jack Thornton was about to discover what 200 combined horsepower could really do. Jack Thornton was 23 years old, from Bakersfield, California, population 29,000. He'd grown up poor during the Depression, the son of an orange picker who taught him one thing: when you can't match someone straight up, you find another way. Jack was 5'7", 140 pounds, too small for football, too poor for college. He'd joined the Army Air Forces in early 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, mostly because it meant 3 meals a day and a chance to send money home. Nobody in Bakersfield expected much from Jack Thornton. He didn't expect much from himself, but Jack had something. Growing up, he'd worked summers at a small airfield outside town, fueling crop dusters. He'd watched the pilots work, seen how they used terrain, how they dove low and pulled up fast to spread pesticide across the orchards. The owner, an old barnstormer named Pete Hargrove, had let Jack sit in the cockpit sometimes. "Feel the controls, kid," Pete would say. "An airplane ain't just an engine, it's balance. It's knowing what your machine can do that the other guys can't." Jack never forgot that. Flight training came easy to him. He wasn't the best marksman. He wasn't the fastest thinker. But he understood aircraft, how they moved, how they breathed, how they responded when you pushed them to the edge. By the time he earned his wings in May 1943, the Army Air Forces was ramping up operations in Europe. They needed pilots badly. Jack shipped out to England in September, assigned to the 55th Fighter Group, 38th Fighter Squadron, flying the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was controversial. Twin-boomed, twin-engine, it looked like nothing else in the sky. 2 Allison V1710 engines, 600 horsepower each, mounted on long booms that extended back from the wings. The pilot sat in a central nacelle between them, surrounded by glass, with a 20mm cannon and 4 50-caliber machine guns in the nose. It was fast in a straight line, over 400 miles per hour in level flight. It could climb well. It had range, but it had problems. The biggest problem was roll rate. In a tight, twisting dogfight, the P-38 was sluggish compared to the nimble German fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, and especially the Focke-Wulf FW-190. The FW-190 was a beast. Powered by a BMW radial engine producing 700 horsepower, it was compact, brutally fast, and could roll faster than almost any Allied fighter. German pilots loved it. Between October 1943 and January 1944, P-38 units in the European theater reported a loss rate of 14% per mission over occupied Europe. That meant 1 in 7 pilots didn't come home. The numbers were staggering. The 55th Fighter Group alone lost 18 aircraft in those 3 months. 18 pilots. Most of them died trying to dogfight FW-190s at medium altitude, where the German fighter could outturn and outroll them. Jack Thornton's closest friend was a pilot named Robert Bobby Chen, 24, from Sacramento. Bobby was Chinese-American, the son of immigrants who ran a laundry on J Street. He'd faced discrimination his whole life, but he'd earned his wings same as anyone else. Bobby and Jack had met in flight training and been assigned to the same squadron. They flew as wingmen. They bunked next to each other. Bobby was always talking about after the war, about opening a garage together, Thornton and Chen's auto repair, 50-50, back in California. They shook hands on it one night in the barracks, December 1943, after a mission where they both barely made it back. "Partners," Bobby said, grinning. "We're gonna fix cars and get rich, Jack." Jack had laughed. "Yeah, Bobby. Partners." January 14, 1944. Escort mission over northwest Germany. Bobby Chen's P-38 took a burst of 20mm cannon fire from an FW-190 during a turning fight at 18,000 feet. The shells tore through his right engine and into the cockpit. Bobby tried to bail out, but he was too low. His Lightning went into an inverted spin and hit the ground near Osnabrück at 08:03 hours. Jack saw it happen. He was 2,000 feet above, scissoring with another FW-190, and he watched Bobby's plane tumble out of the sky, trailing black smoke. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't help. The FW-190 he was fighting broke off and ran. Jack flew home alone. They found Bobby's body 3 months later after the Allies pushed through. He was 24 years old. There was no garage in Sacramento. There was no 50-50 partnership. There was just a telegram to Bobby's parents and a folded flag. Jack Thornton stopped talking much after that. He flew his missions. He followed orders. But something was burning in him, a cold, methodical anger. The problem wasn't courage. P-38 pilots had courage. The problem wasn't training. They were trained. The problem was tactics. The problem was the way they were being told to fight. Standard doctrine for P-38 pilots in early 1944 was simple. Engage enemy fighters in turning combat. Use your superior firepower to overwhelm them. But that doctrine was written by men who'd never flown against an FW-190. The 190 could outturn a P-38. It could outroll a P-38. If you tried to dogfight it at 15,000 or 20,000 feet, the German pilot would get on your tail and stay there. 18 P-38's lost in 3 months. Bobby Chen, Danny Morrison from Ohio, Frank Delgado from Texas. All dead. All killed the same way, trying to turn with FW-190s. Jack noticed something nobody else seemed to be paying attention to. The P-38 had 2 engines. That meant 3 200 horsepower combined. No single-engine fighter could match that. But doctrine said to use that power in level flight or climbs, not in combat maneuvering. Conserve your engines, the training manual said. Avoid high-stress maneuvers that could cause overheating or failure. The thinking was that 2 engines meant redundancy, safety, a way to get home if one failed. It didn't mean aggressive tactics, but Jack kept thinking about Pete Hargrove, the old crop duster pilot. An airplane ain't just an engine, it's balance, it's knowing what your machine can do that the other guys can't. What could a P-38 do that an FW-190 couldn't? It couldn't turn tighter, it couldn't roll faster, but it could accelerate harder. It could dive faster, and it could keep that speed longer because it had 2 engines delivering power smoothly, without the torque and vibration of a single big radial. Late January 1944, Jack started flying differently. Not officially, not in any way that showed up in after-action reports. He just stopped trying to turn with the enemy. When an FW-190 engaged him, Jack would pull his nose up slightly, firewall both throttles and accelerate away in a shallow climb. The FW-190 couldn't keep up. It would try to follow burning fuel, but Jack's twin Allisons would pull him away every time. Once he had separation, 100 yards, maybe 500, he'd reverse hard, diving back down with all that speed and catch the German from above and behind. The FW-190 pilot would see him coming too late. By the time he tried to evade, Jack was already firing. The first time Jack tried it was January 28, 1944, during a sweep over the Ruhr Valley. He was jumped by 2 FW-190s at 22,000 feet. Instead of turning into them, he pushed both throttles to war emergency power and climbed at a steep angle, 3 200 horsepower screaming. The Germans followed for maybe 10 seconds. then started falling behind. Jack watched them in his mirrors. One broke off. The other kept trying. Jack pulled into a chandelle, a climbing, turning reversal, and came down on the persistent 190 from above. The German pilot never saw him. Jack's 20mm cannon and 4 50 cals hit the FW-190's engine cowling and left wing. The 190 rolled over and went down smoking. Jack didn't celebrate, he just flew home. But word spread. The other pilots in the 38th Squadron noticed. "Thornton got one yesterday," someone said in the ready room. "Didn't even turn with the guy, just ran him out of energy and bounced him." More pilots started asking Jack how he did it. He explained it simply. "Don't dogfight them. Make them chase you. Use both engines. When they're slow, you're fast. That's when you kill them." February 1944, Jack started working with his squadron mates to refine the tactic. It wasn't just about raw speed. It was about energy management. Understanding that an airplane in motion has both kinetic energy, speed, and potential energy, altitude, and you can trade one for the other. The P-38's twin engines meant you could build energy faster than a single-engine fighter. You could climb away, convert speed to altitude, then dive back down and convert altitude to speed. The FW-190 couldn't match that cycle. It had one engine, it could do one thing well at a time. The P-38 could do two things well simultaneously. Jack called it boom and zoom. Climb, dive, shoot, climb again. Never turn, never slow down. Use your power. By mid-February, half the pilots in the 38th Squadron were using the tactic. Loss rates started dropping. In February 1944, the 55th Fighter Group lost only 4 P-38's in combat, compared to 9 in January. In March, they lost 2. The Luftwaffe noticed. German pilots started reporting that the twin-engine American fighter was no longer engaging in turning combat. Intelligence reports from captured German documents in mid-1944 showed confusion. The P-38 is avoiding dogfights and using high-speed attacks from altitude, one report stated. Pilots are instructed to avoid extended chases and disengage if the enemy climbs away. The FW-190's greatest advantage, its roll rate and turning ability, was suddenly irrelevant. The P-38 pilots weren't playing that game anymore. Jack flew 47 combat missions between January and May 1944. He was credited with 7 confirmed kills, all FW-190's or BF-109's, all using the same tactic. He never lost a wingman after Bobby Chen, not one. Other squadrons started adopting the boom and zoom approach. By late spring 1944, it was becoming unofficial doctrine across 8th Air Force P-38 units. Pilots called it the Thornton Run or double-engine energy fighting. It wasn't in any manual. It wasn't approved by headquarters. But it worked. March 17, 1944, the mission that opened this story, Jack Thornton faced those 3 FW-190's over the Rhine Valley at 24,000 feet. They climbed toward him confidently, expecting a dogfight. Jack didn't give them one. He pushed both throttles forward, felt the twin Allisons surge, and pulled into a steep climb. The 190's followed, but within seconds they were struggling. Jack watched his airspeed, 380 miles per hour in the climb, still accelerating. The Germans were at 340, then 320, losing speed as they tried to follow his angle. One broke off. The other 2 kept coming, stubborn or stupid. Jack leveled off at 28,000 feet, rolled inverted, and dove. He came down on the trailing FW-190 at over 450 miles per hour, fired a 2-second burst, and saw strikes on the 190's fuselage and wing route. The German fighter snapped right and went into a spin. The third 190 broke hard left and ran for the deck. Jack didn't chase. He climbed back to altitude. He landed at 11:42 hours. His crew chief, Sergeant Mike O'Hara from Boston, walked around the P-38, checking for damage. There was none. "How'd it go, Lieutenant?" O'Hara asked. Jack shut down the engines, pulled off his gloves, and said, "They tried to climb with me, bad idea." By summer 1944, the P-38's reputation had changed. It was no longer the clumsy twin-engine fighter that German pilots mocked. It was a killer. Loss rates for P-38 units in the European theater dropped from 14% in late 1943 to under 6% by June 1944. Over those 6 months, Pilots using boom and zoom tactics claimed over 240 German fighters destroyed, compared to fewer than 90 in the previous 6 months using traditional dogfighting. The math was brutal, the tactic worked, but Jack Thornton never got official credit for developing it. There was no memo, no training bulletin, no commendation. The Army Air Forces didn't document tactical innovations from line pilots. Doctrine came from headquarters, from staff officers and test pilots, and the fighter board at Wright Field. By late 1944, official manuals for the P-38 included guidance on energy tactics and vertical maneuvering, but they never mentioned Jack Thornton's name. The tactics became institutionalized, absorbed into the machine, credited to no one. Jack flew 73 combat missions total. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions on April 22, 1944, when he single-handedly engaged 4 Bf-109s and shot down 2, covering a crippled B-17 limping home over Belgium. The citation mentioned his courage and skill. It didn't mention boom and zoom. It didn't mention Bobby Chen. It didn't mention the 18 dead pilots, whose tactics got them killed before Jack figured out a better way. The war ended in May 1945. Jack Thornton came home to Bakersfield in August, 24 years old, with 73 missions and 7 kills and a Distinguished Flying Cross. He didn't talk about the war. He went back to work at the airfield where he'd started, fueling planes, doing maintenance. Pete Hargrove, the old crop duster pilot, had died in 1943, but his widow still ran the place. She hired Jack as a mechanic. He worked there for 38 years. Jack married a local school teacher named Ann Sullivan in 1947. They had 3 kids. He coached Little League. He went to church on Sundays. He fixed airplanes and cars and lawn mowers. He never opened Thornton and Chen's auto repair. That dream died over Osnabrück in January 1944. But he kept Bobby's photograph in his workshop, tucked behind a toolbox where nobody else would see it. In 1989, a military historian named Dr. Raymond Kowalski was researching P-38 tactics for a book on fighter combat in World War II. He was going through after-action reports from the 55th Fighter Group and noticed a pattern. Starting in late January 1944, there was a sudden shift in how pilots described their engagements. Less turning combat, more vertical maneuvering, energy tactics, loss rates dropping. Kowalski cross-referenced the reports with pilot names and found one name appearing consistently: Second Lieutenant Jack Thornton. Kowalski tracked down Jack's service record, then his address. He called Jack in April 1989. Jack was 68 years old, retired, living in the same small house in Bakersfield he'd bought in 1948. Kowalski explained what he'd found. "Mr. Thornton, I believe you developed the boom and zoom tactic that saved dozens, maybe hundreds of P-38 pilots in 1944. I'd like to interview you for my book." There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, Jack said, "I just flew the airplane the way it wanted to be flown. That's all." Kowalski asked if he could visit. Jack said okay. The interview lasted 3 hours. Jack was reluctant to talk at first, but eventually he opened up. He talked about Bobby Chen. He talked about the FW-190s. He talked about Pete Hargrove and crop dusters and the feeling of 3 200 horsepower pulling you out of trouble. He talked about watching 18 friends die because they were told to fight the wrong way. "I just figured," Jack said quietly, "that if I had 2 engines and they had 1, I should use that. Seemed obvious." Kowalski's book was published in 1991. It had a chapter on P-38 tactics and credited Jack Thornton by name as the likely originator of the boom and zoom doctrine that became standard in the European theater. A few aviation magazines picked up the story. Jack got some letters from other P-38 pilots, thanking him, saying they'd used his tactics and survived. He answered every letter by hand. Jack Thornton died on March 3, 1996, at 75 years old. Heart attack, sudden, at home. His obituary in the Bakersfield Californian was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his service in World War II, his Distinguished Flying Cross, his 73 missions. It said he'd been a mechanic at Hargrove Field for 38 years. It said he was survived by his wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention boom and zoom. It didn't mention Bobby Chen. It didn't mention that his tactical innovation had saved countless lives. There's a small display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, in the World War II gallery. It's a P-38 Lightning restored, painted in the colors of the 55th Fighter Group. On the placard next to it, there's a paragraph about P-38 tactics in the European theater. It mentions energy fighting and vertical maneuvering. It says these tactics emerged in early 1944 and significantly improved survivability. It doesn't mention Jack Thornton's name, but if you talk to the old pilots, the ones still alive, the ones who flew P-38's in 1944 and 45, they remember. They'll tell you about the Thornton Run. They'll tell you about the kid from Bakersfield who figured out that 2 engines weren't a liability. They were the advantage. You just had to know how to use them. And when you did, the Luftwaffe stopped laughing.